Okay, so we are recording now. And so I'm going to start with this one because it kind of goes a little bit with some of the stuff we were talking about last week, which has to do with discussing client confidentiality and helping them understand it at the start. I believe this is the video where they're Australian, so there are some fun accents, so just heads up with that.
So thanks for coming along today, Brooke. I've really been looking forward to meeting you.
Yeah, me too.
Cool, okay. So I just wanted to ask, did you receive that information pack that we sent out to you in the mail?
Yes, I did.
Fabulous,
Yeah.
okay. So would you mind if we just spend a few minutes going through that together now?
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Okay,
Yeah, no
all right. So I guess something really important that I would like to draw your attention to first of all is this issue here of confidentiality.
Okay.
Basically everything that you and I talk about together in therapy is just between you and I.
All right.
However, because I am a probationary psychologist, the things that we discuss I may need to share with my supervisor.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's all right. Will it only be with your supervisor?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
There are a few special circumstances, though, where I may have to break confidentiality. That is if you tell me that you might be of harm to yourself or someone else.
Okay.
If you tell me that you've been involved in a serious crime.
Okay.
Or if somebody else wishes to access the information that we talk about in the context of legal proceedings.
Okay.
And they take it as subpoena.
All right.
I'm required to give that information then.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But of course, if any of these things ever did come up, I would discuss these with you first.
Okay. That'd be good. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So something else I just would like to draw your attention to here as well is just our fee here at the clinic.
Yes.
Which, as we discussed on the phone, is $20
Yeah,
a session.
that's fine. Not a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I understand from time to time that things can come up as well and that you might have to reschedule one of your appointments. We just ask that if you could provide us with about 24 hours notice beforehand.
Sure.
So that gives us a chance to be able to set up another appointment time.
Yeah, that's fine. No worries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have any other questions about anything that you read on that sheet there?
No, it all seems fine with me. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you wouldn't mind just popping your signature at the bottom there. Thanks,
No
Brooke.
problem. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so I guess, to start off with, have you ever been to therapy before?
No, I haven't. I'm feeling a little nervous about it.
Yeah, I can understand that it can be a bit confronting and scary the first time you come along.
Yeah.
So I guess, just to give you a bit of an idea about how I like to work with clients, is that I like it to be a collaborative approach so that the two of us get to work together on your problems and concerns that you're having at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
So the purpose of today's session, I guess, would be for me to get more of an understanding of what's happening for you lately.
All right.
And give us a chance to get to know each other a little bit more.
Okay.
Alrighty. So here we have a nice example of, something that seems like it's probably going pretty darn well, right? As opposed to some of our other examples, including some we'll look at today. But what did you all like about what the therapist did in this scenario?
I really liked that she made sure she had the paper, that she was fully informed on everything.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Yeah, because okay, you got the paper, but how many people actually read it, right? What else did you all like?
I liked how she broke it down for her, everything that what confidentiality limits were and when it would need to happen, and just making sure the patient understands that before any therapy happens.
Yeah, so important, right? Before we dive into anything, let's talk about what this actually means and what are the times I'd have to, have some limits on what I could keep confidential. Yeah, and as you could see, it was just very upfront, right? Very confident, you don't need to be weird about it. And I also really like how she was yeah, it's, if you haven't been to therapy, it can be nerve-wracking, right? And because it can be for folks. Anything else stand out for anybody else?
I would just say I like the way that she her tone and everything. It wasn't aggressive, because sometimes she didn't just come off right. It was kind of a monotone, and she was able to get her point across without having to be really loud or anything like that. I feel like that made it more comfortable to be able to like understand everything and be like, okay, sure, you know, because it's like that tone, it was kind of like a peaceful, you know, it wasn't like real like loud or anything or throw you off. She wasn't like disrespectful with coming off with telling her the information or anything like that, or like what she has to do and can't, you know, things like that.
Yeah, I think that that's so important and something that like we don't necessarily automatically think of, but part of learning to, you know, interact in these client type settings is like learning your therapist voice and your therapist behaviors and things like that. So yeah, I took a whole class my first semester of grad school where we just learned things like try to sit open instead of like with your arms crossed so that you're open to the client, and like she was doing a really good job like leaning forward, right, as opposed to like getting really far back. And it doesn't mean you have to do that the whole time, but just, you know, when you first start your session or like when the client is saying something that's probably really hard for them. The other kind of fun thing that happens that it doesn't even happen consciously, but like if you watch a recording of, you know, yourself interacting with the client, a lot of times, partially because of the motor neurons, the mirror neurons, sorry, that humans have, a lot of times folks will find themselves mirroring their client's actions. So like if the client leans forward, the therapist will lean forward. This is also something that like my supervisors taught me, like, don't just be in your notes, right? Like try to be present with the person, which can be really helpful. We may or may not get a symbol as a piece sort of being weird with our piles of stuff in the office here. So yeah. All right, so the next one is more typical of some of the ones we've watched, but gets at the APA ethics code in a pretty comprehensive way. So let me go ahead and again share screen. There we go. And I've got the sound optimized. And I have the video pulled out here. So this again is one where, oh gosh, that was dramatic, sir. Just like a crash landing on my desk here. But this is one where they've got some scenarios that, you know, we have students not necessarily acting well, but kind of illustrates things nicely.
Ethics in psychology. Rule 1. Informed consent. Michael Strong, seen here, is brushing his teeth. Little does he know someone is watching. Whoa! He screams like a girl. Back on task, Anthony, on all right, broke the first rule of ethics.
It's okay, I'm doing a study.
He didn't get the participant's informed consent. Next time, he should ask the participant, Mike, if he wants to be in Anthony's study. And if Mike says yes, Anthony could then proceed to observe Mike's behavior. Rule 2.
All right, so again, a little silly, obviously, but gives a nice perspective on the idea of like, yeah, if we're going to do therapy, if we're going to be doing research, we do in fact need to have some informed consent, right? And not just like be a creeper in the bathroom. You know, and this becomes tricky if we're doing research that's like observational, right? Like to what point do we need to let someone know if we're like watching them in the grill? And would that change their behavior? You know, for things like, so I think Ashanti has shared with you all, and then I've shared with you all that I'm on the advisory board for the new research organization that's happening through CBA. And like, for example, if we're doing research with kiddos, not only do we need to get parent consent because they can't legally consent for themselves, but then we also need to get what we call assent, which is often verbal, from the kids. So like the parents could say, yeah, it's fine for my student to, you know, be involved in research, but the kid also has to say, yeah, I'm fine with it, right? We want to make sure both parties. All right, so the next thing is going to talk about sorry, deception. I thought it was deception, but I wanted to make double sure because Simba was right in front of the.
Written deception.
Do you agree to work with animals?
Yes.
We see here that Michael has agreed to working with animals. But what does that really entail? If you notice, the question is open-ended and can be interpreted in many different ways. Therefore,
This isn't what I signed up for.
Mike is now going to work with some hungry lions. This is because Anthony, the researcher, can deceive Mike, having him do tasks that he didn't foresee from ahead of time of the agreement, which also breaks the informed consent. To prevent this, researchers must keep the agreement made to their participants specific as to not take advantage of the participants.
So here again, like this gets a little tricky with research, right? You don't want to tell people your hypothesis or the exact thing of your study, but you also want to, like do no harm and keep people safe, right? Here, if we want to, it would be something like, do you agree to, work in a potentially dangerous situation with large animals? And people might not agree to that, right? As opposed to like, they might think working with animals is like hanging out with Simba, like I am right now, right? He's just laying underneath the camera. And so that becomes really important to be very clear with people.
Rule 3. Verbal deception.
Do you believe in stereotypes?
He asks, do you believe in stereotypes? How very open-ended. Let's see what happens.
I mean, yeah, I guess they exist.
So I was just wondering if you down as racist.
Aha! The wording of that question deceived poor old Mike into giving a false answer, which will create a false result in Anthony's findings. Mike was clearly making the statement that there is such a thing as a stereotype, but Anthony can now say that Mike believes stereotypes about different people. To rectify this violation of ethics, one must always make sure that the question he or she is writing has no bias and is specific so the participant understands what he or she is answering.
Yeah, so in addition to being ethically sound, that's actually just sound research practices and assessment practices, that your assessment instrument should be precise. It should be clear. You should avoid errors or questions that can be interpreted a whole bunch of different ways. Or if you're going to have something like that, you have follow-ups before you just sort of like rate someone as racist, right? All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is coercion.
Rule 4. Coercion. Oh, well, hello, stranger. Just your average Joe minding his own business.
Hey man, you want to take a survey?
Good job, Anthony. You asked for permission before conducting a study.
Nah, I don't really have the time today. Sorry, bro.
Oh man, huge blow to Anthony's confidence. But oh well, sometimes, if not most of the time, people, for whatever reasons, will not want or be able to take your study. That's just the nature of it. But will Anthony accept no for an answer?
Want to say no again?
No, what a jerk. This guy stinks. Anyway, don't ever try and make someone participate in your study. If they say no, you have to back off. Unless your name is the United States government and you are performing a census. In that, you can stalk people all you want until you get their information.
Okay, so this goes back to when we were talking about the Stanford prison experiment last week, where, you can't like make people take part in your study. You can't tell them they can't leave. Like that's one of the things Zimbardo did in his like dual role as prison warden that was really bad, is he like a subject wanted to leave. He was like, this is not good, I'm leaving. And Zimbardo was like, well, what if instead you like became an informant for me about the resurrections? And like he should have stepped out of that warden role and said, you are declining consent to participate, you can leave at any time, boom, right? So that becomes really important. And we have to be careful about compensation for that reason, that it's not a bribe, right? If I were going to offer you all, $1,000 to do a 15-minute survey, that becomes that bribe level, right? As opposed to, the class credit that you get for most studies.
Rule 5, anonymity. What? Anonymous keeps the identity secret. Oh, Mike, you're back. All right, play.
Stay tuned, tonight at 6, we review Michael Strong's survey. And guess what? He's a racist.
Ha 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 ha. Oh, I mean, that culprit Anthony revealed Mike's anonymous survey questions. This is a huge violation of ethics. Unless a participant directly and explicitly says you can use their name, do not, I repeat, do not reveal their personal information.
And this is, again, just good research practice in addition to being ethical. Typically, when we do studies, we're actually studying large groups of people and we analyze the data by group. And good studies now, unless we need to do a follow-up, are just completely anonymous. So if I'm posting a study through SurveyMonkey, for example, there's a way I can even turn off, like it won't even collect people's IP addresses. There's no way I could connect their information with their name. And so I'm just getting the information and that's what matters, right? Like I don't want to say who cares who does it, because obviously I'm very grateful to anyone who participates in my research. But, we want to make sure that they are able to stay either anonymous or confidential. Confidential would be, we do need to sort of be able to track the data to the person because we're looking at it at different time points, but only say the researcher themselves, maybe a research assistant, has access to that information.
Rule 6, risk.
This is a test on humans' ability to adapt.
Sounds simple enough, right? Oh, yeah. No, yeah. No, yeah, it should be simple.
Okay.
So we'll just let you know when we want to begin.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right.
Question Mark Kid has done 3 things right. First, he asked for permission, did not compensate or coerce Mike into participating, and as far as I can tell, is keeping with his identity secret. Nothing could possibly go wrong.
The test starts now.
Huh?
How would you react if your brake stopped working?
What? No!
So again, this one's sort of goofy, right? But we have to think about this. We have to think about what physical risk, but particularly for psychology study, what mental risk might we be putting people into, right? So if we're going to do some sort of experiment and we're inducing people, and this is something we do, to feel anxious or depressed in the moment, we also have to do like an induction. That's not a proper term, but basically like do something at the end to help them feel happy again, essentially, or not anxious. This is one of the reasons why when you participate in the studies at Wesleyan, we always have like the counseling center information at the end, things along those lines, so that if it does bring up anything for you, you have that ability to, or that information right there. This is also why, like just doing the full Milgram experiment again wouldn't be allowed, right? We have to really think about how much is this going to stress out the participant. All right, so I'm going to skip ahead to the debriefing because this is a very important part of research as well.
Rule 7, debriefing.
Mr. Wang, I'm finished with that survey that you requested.
Stranger over there, who may or may not have been responsible for the death of Mike, pending further investigation, has just filled out a survey. All is planned in an ethical procedure.
But do you mind me asking, what was that survey for, anyway?
Well, there's literally nothing Anthony has done right. He broke rule number 7, debriefing. You must always debrief your participants before they leave the experiment.
And so what that means is you would tell them, you know, what the study was about. You would tell them why you're having them participate. And if there was deception, you would debrief that there's, you know, like you break that deception and explain. This is one of the few things the Milgram experiment did right, is they had an extensive debriefing session. They actually had the person playing the learner, the person getting shocked, come back out and like shake the person's hand and be like, I'm okay. So this is really vital.
Summary time. Remember the 7 rules of...
Yeah, and so like, I think we got it about the summary, but I just liked that, again, that was a nicer way to kind of see some of this stuff in action, and it's always fun to have before acting. So thoughts on any of that? Did any of those really resonate for you, or any of those seem more clear after seeing them acted out, however poorly?
Yeah, I just was thinking, like, when you were mentioning the natural observation and like consent, like the lines with that, because when they were going over, I was like, well, how do you like research people that like you just want to see them in there? Sorry, gotta clear my throat.
All good, all good.
So how do you like get consent? Like, what are like the lines with that? Like, what is considered okay to get consent for and what's not necessary, kind of thing? Because some research calls for it, just to see how people interact in certain groups and just watching. So yeah, I like that you brought that up, because it was a question in my head, because I was like, I know there's these things here. So it's like, yeah, I just wondered like if there's something out there that's like, okay, if it's this kind of research, consent isn't needed, or if it's this, it is.
Yeah, that's such a good question, Sasha. And basically what it ends up boiling down to is essentially, are you watching behavior that the person would do anyway, if that makes sense? So you would essentially, like, if we wanted to go watch like how people interact in the grill. Oh, or actually we had a 480 project like this a couple of years ago I can talk about. So they took their observation was actually whether or not people were interested in participating in a study, and they had like sort of an average looking person go up to and approach people to participate in the study, and then they had someone who was like really fitting the like pretty ideal go up and do it, and they were trying to see if more people would participate if the person was more attractive, and they did find that. So stuff like that is considered totally fine. They didn't have to get consent to just ask someone to participate in a study. I've also heard of some studies where like you might just go to a mall and watch people walking around and sort of what are their patterns of the stores they're going into. Again, not invasive, not anything you're gonna harm, right? And that ends up being fine without a consent form. Obviously, if you're getting into more like personal or risky situations, like there's it's called like the tea room study, where this guy frequented places where before it was, you know, more open and acceptable than it is now. Men who slept with men, I don't even know that they would all identify as homosexual, would go to hook up essentially. And this guy like didn't let them know he was observing them. And, you know, clearly that is not a situation where you wouldn't need consent, right? That's a situation where it's not something that people are openly doing. I can think of, I think it was the only one, we rotate being chair of our institutional review board throughout the people in the psych department. And I can think it's the only one when I was IRB chair that we flat out rejected rather than just asking them to make revisions, was one where they were going to stage a fight in the grill and just see how people reacted. And we were like, no. like people are gonna like try to get involved and break it up, and they might get hurt. And it turned out it was for a class, and they had never even like run it by their professor before they turned it in. When I like let her know, we're just rejecting this one, she was like, they're doing what? So yeah, I mean, we certainly want to make sure we're protecting privacy, protecting people from physical or mental harm, right? But yeah, if you're just sort of like observing normal human behavior in public, you typically don't need a consent form. Great question, Sasha. Any other questions or thoughts that came up from that one?
So I like the from like those videos, like when we read ethics or ethics documents, like always like with these words that you cannot understand and stuff like that. And even though it's like a little bit goofy, the videos, it's like a really good visual and pretty simple to like for you to understand what it's all ethics is about. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, because it gets so abstract, and things like ethics codes are typically decided by committee, right? So then like the wording gets even more like, it almost becomes a compromise, right? Of like, this person wanted to word it this way, and this person wanted to word it that way. Yeah, so I think that having like watching videos or reading case studies can really illustrate this. Yeah. All right, well, there's two more things I want to do before we wrap up today. We'll get out early. The first is to just touch briefly, I've kind of hinted at this, but on ethics for interns. There are a couple articles related to this posted on Blackboard if you're interested. I've been working with all of your sites for a while, so I don't anticipate any issues, but essentially your internship should be educational. They should not be doing a Devil Wears Prada where you have to go like pick up their dry cleaning and things like that. My first year I did this, we did have a supervisor who tried to make his intern do that, and we were like, no, that's not what this is about, right? And then not exploiting you, right? So you all are in this for 10 hours a week. And again, it'll fluctuate. Like Sasha this past week did 8 hours one day, right, for training. But that means another week she won't do as many hours, right? So, you know, if they're trying to be like, no, you need to be here 40 hours, you can just be like, I'm gonna talk to Dr. Myers. So like making sure you're not being exploited is really important too. All right, the last thing I want to do before we wrap up today is starting next week, I'm going to do our abnormal review, where we talk about disorders of that you might be running into at your sites. So typically I cover things like, you know, autism spectrum disorder, schizophrenia, things along those lines. But, you know, what are you running into that would be helpful for you to get a review of like the basic criteria for a disorder?
I'm working with a lot of Alzheimer patients.
Definitely. Yeah, and what I usually do with that too is cover the other types of dementia too, just because they can look alike. What else are people running into?
The kids that I met on Thursday, some of them are a little bit more, I guess tricky is kind of the word. They're more reserved, and they don't, what's the name? Okay, I try to give an example. So I asked one of the kids like what their name was, and they gave me a name that wasn't their name. And that's just their way of being like cautious, just like knowing how trauma affects children and their social behaviors, I guess.
Yes, definitely. Excellent. Anything else that stands out to folks? And I have like a big long PowerPoint that relates to sites people have worked at in the past. So I just update it every year. And so there's probably some stuff in there that's relevant to y'all as well.
I know for me, that all the children have something different. Like some people, like some children are on the spectrum, some aren't, some is more mild, some is more severe. And then some children are just there maybe because they have like dyslexia or something. So it's just like it all depends, or they might have dyslexia and autism, or some of them like you might not have that. So it just, I know it all depends on the child, since I haven't been there like too long or like a full day or anything to like learn different kids. I also learned that well, I've seen that certain kids kind of cling to you more than others. Like I know when I was trying to stay after a little bit more, because Miss Haley was working with like two girls that kind of had like a conflict in class with each other. And she was like, if you want to stay, you can. But she said, then at the same time, it's like if one of the little girls don't feel like they want you to stay, then you know you might have to go. Like just the comfortability of it. So I know when I did ask one of the little girls, one of them was like, yeah, you can stay. I wouldn't mind. And then the other one was like, and she was like, no, I'm a little shy around new people and I don't really want to like talk yet. So it's like that thing too, like, you know, certain kids adapting and not. So it's like, how do you deal with that situation if a child is not all the way comfortable with you? How do you make a child like with certain like, you know, disorders or any type of like disability or something become comfortable with you enough to where they are used to you and be able to like open up to you more?
That's a great one. Yeah, I'll definitely look at anxiety and depression in kids and trauma, and yeah, some tips for getting them to feel more comfortable with you. That's a great one. Anything else standing up to folks?
For me, it was so, working with adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, they're like divided by groups. So yeah, there's adults that have, you know, autism groups, and others are like more advanced, and they help them to get jobs and stuff like that. But others like they need help with a lot of stuff. So it's like by categories and groups.
That's great. Yeah, I can definitely cover, you know, how that extends into adulthood. Yeah. Excellent. Well, and I'll tell Ariana this when I email her too, but Ariana, if there's anything that we haven't talked about you want me to cover, shoot me an email. Same thing for the rest of y'all. If there's anything that comes up over the next week that you're like, ooh, I really want Dr. Myers to cover that, shoot me an email. And then typically this ends up taking 2 or 3 weeks just because we really get into discussing the nuances of the disorders. So, you know, if something comes up next week that we want more info on, I'll research it in between and have it. So, well, alrighty. Thanks everyone for being here and for, go ahead and stop.